In Numbers chapter 33 this morning, Numbers 33, and there are only 4 chapters left in the book, Numbers 33, 34, 35, and 36. And all 4 of these chapters have to do with the laws for when Israel enters the Promised Land. So pretty much what we're doing specifically here, if everything in Numbers has been about their journey leading up to the Promised Land, now God gives them a series of laws at the end that tell them how they're supposed to behave when they finally get there. But chapter 33 starts off with a list of all of the places that Israel has camped. 33 in verses 1 through 49. Now, what would the purpose of such a list be? Why would they suddenly at this juncture list all these locations?
The journey from captivity.
Okay, reviewing their journey from captivity, right. And I think that the reason for that has a lot to do with the fact that what we're looking at is, before we can talk about where we're going, we need to talk about where we've been. Before we can talk about what you do when you get there, well, let's take a look back and see how Israel's come. Now, I'm not going to read this list. I'm just going to kind of summarize the locations. There's 40 locations total. At 42 if you count Sinai and the plains of Moab. I don't know if this is an all-inclusive list because there's some places mentioned in the Old Testament that where Israel camped that aren't even in this list. But regardless, what we have is in verses 3 and 4, we have Ramses. That's where they were the day after Passover. They went out boldly before the Egyptians. Succoth, that's where they camped on the way to the Red Sea in Exodus 13 in verse 20. And then we have near Migdol in verse 7, that's where the Red Sea is. They crossed the Red Sea at Migdol. In verse 8, Marah, that's the place where they had the bitter water, and they threw the tree in the water, and the water turned what became drinkable. You have the wilderness of Sin in verses 10 through 12. That's where they had manna for the first time. You have Rephidim in verse 14. That's where they got the water from the rock. Whenever Moses struck the rock and water came forth and God gave the people water to drink, they grumbled against him. It's also called Meribah in that instance. In verse 15, after they go from Rephidim to the wilderness of Sinai, and well, they've spent quite a good deal of time at Mount Sinai because that's where they got the law. After that, verse 16, Kibroth Hattaavah. That's the incident where the people of Israel demanded meat to eat as well, and God sent them quail and struck them with the plague. He said, I was going to send you so much quail that it will come out of your nostrils. We read about that in Numbers 11. Verse 17 mentions Hazeroth. Hazeroth is the place where Miriam and Aaron contended with Moses and said, has God only spoken through you? Hasn't He spoken through us as well? And God strikes Miriam with leprosy for 7 days on that occasion. And then after verse 17, pretty much everything from verse 18 to verse 30 is unknown to us. We won't find these places mentioned anywhere else in the Bible at all. And what we're looking at probably is the 40 years of wandering they did in the wilderness on that occasion. Verses 31 through 33 are also unknown to us, but they also appear in Deuteronomy 10 in verses 6 and 7. In verse 36, we have Ezion-Geber, and they journeyed from Ezion-Geber and camped in the wilderness of Zin, that is Kadesh. And Zin-Kadesh is where we have the incident of Numbers 20, where the people complained that they have no water, and God told Moses to speak to the rock, and Moses struck the rock instead and said, well, shall we bring forth water for you from this rock? And that was the location where God told Moses that he would not be able to enter the Promised Land either. And after they go from Zin to Kadesh, in verses 37 through 39, it mentions Mount Hor. And it specifically says that Aaron dies at Mount Hor at the age of 123. In verse 40, we have Arad. Arad is the place where Israel fought a great battle in Numbers chapter 21. And in verses 43 and 44, we have Oboth and Abiram and Dibon, and these are all locations that are mentioned in Numbers 21 as well. And finally, after that, after they go from Abiram in verse 47, they come to Nebo. And anybody know what's significant about Mount Nebo? What happens at Mount Nebo? We haven't gotten to it yet, but Moses dies at Mount Nebo, right? But that's not the last place Israel camps, interestingly. After they're at Nebo, they go to the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho. And the book of Deuteronomy begins by saying that this was a discourse that Moses delivered on the plains of Moab. So what we see is that Israel's camped at the plains of Moab. Moses actually backtracks to Nebo, climbs up the mountain, looks over the promised land, and that's where he dies. So that's basically the summary of their journey. They're camped on the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho. I have attempted to draw another version of the map on the board, which may or may not be more to scale. I don't know. But you can see that right here we have the Jordan River. This is the Dead Sea. This is Kinnereth, or more popularly known as the Sea of Galilee in New Testament times up here. This big body of water over here is the Mediterranean Sea. In the Old Testament times they called it the Great Sea because it was so big. Over here is Egypt. Over here is the wilderness of Sinai. And over here on the east side of the Jordan is the plains of Moab. Now, the thing about Israel, and pinpointing specific locations where Israel is camped, is a lot of the maps at the back of your Bible are basically presenting people's best guesses. And it's one thing to look at the general geography and say, well, yeah, this is generally where they were. But it's another thing to stick a pin in the location and say, I'm standing on the exact spot that Moses did. Well, you have to get some lucky guesses to get that. That's very difficult to figure out. The fact of the matter is that most place names, you can't find them today unless there's been a continuous settlement at that location. And since Israel's constantly moving around, a lot of these places are simply unknown to us. But that's basically, in a nutshell, the summary of their camping locations. Any questions so far? In verse 50, God begins giving them the laws for the promised land. The Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you cross over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and destroy all their figured stones, and destroy all their molten images, and demolish all their high places, and you shall take possession of the land and live in it, for I have given the land to you to possess it. You shall inherit the land by lot according to your families. To the larger you shall give more inheritance. To the smaller you shall give less inheritance. Wherever the lot falls to anyone, that shall be his. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come about that those whom you let remain of them will become as pricks in your eyes and as thorns in your sides, and they will trouble you in the land in which you live. And as I plan to do to them, so I will do to you." All right. So what is the primary objective here? What does Israel have to do when they enter the promised land?
Purge themselves of all the forms of idolatry that were still in the camp.
Yes.
And I don't think they ever did.
No, they never did actually do what it said here. Because in the book of Joshua, in Joshua 24, Joshua keeps telling them, guys, put away your idols now. And we read that discourse, the famous line, "As for me and for my house, we shall serve the Lord." And I think we need to realize that on the occasion that Joshua says that, most of the people are not serving the Lord. He tells them, you can't serve the Lord. "Oh, but we're going to do it." He says, "Well, then put away your idols already." "Oh, we're going to serve the Lord." "Oh, you're witnesses against yourself here. Put away your idols." And of course, what do we read immediately after in the book of Judges? Well, they forsook the Lord at every turn.
And the prophets have so many allusions to the high places.
Right. The high places were never torn down. They existed in the time of David. They existed in the time of Solomon. The high places were torn down during the times of Hezekiah, but his son managed to rebuild them. And Josiah tore them down. And then more people managed to rebuild them. And it's just a constant battle of the idolatry problem. But Israel is told they must drive out the Canaanites. They must get rid of the Canaanites. Most importantly, they must get rid of the Canaanite religions. And this is not the first time we've seen this command in the law, and this is not the last time we're going to see it. But this failure, what did he say would happen if they didn't drive out the Canaanites?
It'd be like a thorn in their eye or something.
Pricks in your eyes, thorns in your sides. Those are the expressions that are actually used in Judges 1 and 2. Whenever basically God sends His messenger and tells them, you guys didn't do it. Now they're going to be thorns in your sides. Now you're never going to be rid of them.
It's like an infection. If you don't totally get rid of it, it's going to fester and come back and haunt you.
Yes, it's like an infection. Exactly. And basically what happens is God's punishment to the Canaanites comes on, if they don't drive them out, in verse 56 it says, as I planned to do to them, so I will do to you. God planned to utterly destroy the Canaanites. Well, if you don't do that, you're going to be seduced by their religions, and the same thing is going to happen to you. You're going to have the same problems that they have. You're going to get the same judgment that they received. Any questions up to this point, or comments? Yes.
I never really got the high places until my dad told me as a child how it is in India. And if you go into homes that are not Christian homes, and even some of the Christian homes, you can see where the high places were in houses. But they have high places in their houses.
Well, like an elevated area.
And even on the streets, every kilometer or so, there is a high place. And so this is a concept that we're not maybe so familiar with as far as the physical high places. Of course, there are spiritual high places as well that we can use.
Right.
But it was tremendously engrossed in that culture.
Yeah. I believe Ezekiel makes a play on this idea of the high places, the Bama, he calls it, but the high place is basically, it was any elevated place where they could build a shrine to an idol. Now, sometimes they would build high places to Yahweh. They would try to worship the true God, and God didn't like that. He didn't approve of that at all, because in the law, He says, you worship me, you offer your sacrifices to me at the one location that I will choose, in Deuteronomy 12. And so sometimes when you read through the book of Kings and Chronicles, you'll see that the high places were still in the land, but the people only sacrificed to Yahweh on them, which is supposed to be kind of a, you came halfway at least point there. Some of the kings tore down the high places. The reason, why did they always choose elevated areas for it? Why did pagans build their temples on the mountains? In essence, there is a longing to reach heaven. You saw this even when they built the Tower of Babylon. Let's build a tower to heaven and make a name for ourselves, ultimately. Well, they're building a pagan idol temple for themselves. In essence, Babylon becomes the first high place of sorts, quote unquote. Although it doesn't necessarily serve the same function as some of these others, we see really it's the same thing. Mankind is longing to elevate himself, longing to reach God, but he's reaching God in a way that God did not intend for him to do. The only way that God is going to dwell with man and man is going to dwell with God is on God's terms. Man must be faithful. Man must be holy. And so that's what is necessary in all of this. And the idea that, I can somehow get to God if I put myself or my altar on a more elevated place, is just it's a pagan concept, and it's not what God intended for man at all, when it's all said and done. That's a...
They all represent all systems of religion.
Well, yeah, obvious. Well, I guess more or less, yeah, more or less. Chapter 34. We have the borders of the land in the first 15 verses, and again, some of these locations it mentions are a little hard to pinpoint. Some of them aren't. Command the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you as an inheritance, even the land of Canaan according to its borders. Your south sector shall extend from the wilderness of Zin along the side of Edom. Your southern border shall extend from the end of the Salt Sea eastward. Then your border shall turn direction from the south to the ascent of Akrabim and continue to Zin. Its termination shall be to the south of Kadesh Barnea, and shall reach Hazar Adar and continue to Asmon. The border shall turn direction from Asmon to the brook of Egypt, and its termination shall be at the sea. So, in other words, you start from the bottom of the Salt Sea. You actually go east, and And that basically is what we're looking at in terms of their southern border. More or less, and that's not to scale. Verse 6, as for the western border, you shall have the Great Sea. That is its coastline. It shall be your west border. That's pretty easy to figure out. Verses 7 and 8 and 9. This shall be your north border. You shall draw your north line from the Great Sea to Mount Hor. You shall draw a line from Mount Hor to the Lebo Hamath. And the termination of the border shall be at Zedad. And the border shall proceed to Ziphron. Its termination shall be at Hazar Enan. This shall be your north border. And actually, I think that might be above the scope of the chalkboard there, but not that far above. So they go up pretty much into what would be considered modern-day Syria, if you look at a map of the Middle East. And for your eastern border, you shall draw a line from Hazar Enan to Shepham. The border shall go down from Shepham to Riblah on the east side of Ain. The border shall go down and reach to the slope on the east side of the Sea of Kinnereth. That's the top little body of water over the Jordan River. Also, I referred to it as the Sea of Galilee. The border shall go down to the Jordan. Its termination shall be at the Salt Sea. This shall be your land according to its borders all around. So Moses commanded the sons of Israel, saying, this is the land that you are to apportion by lot among you as a possession, which the Lord has commanded to give to the 9.5 tribes. For the tribe of the sons of Reuben have received theirs according to their fathers' households, and the tribe of the sons of Gad according to their fathers' households, and the half tribe of Manasseh have received their possession. The 2.5 tribes have received their possession across the Jordan, opposite Jericho, eastward toward the sun rising. So we learned in Numbers 32 that 3 of the tribes get an inheritance on this side of the Jordan. The other 2.5 of the tribes get an inheritance over there. Everybody else is over on this side. That's the full extent of the land that God was giving to Israel. Now, here is the real question that some people have actually debated about this, but did Israel ever actually occupy all of this land to its fullest extent? I'm seeing some no's. Did anybody think yes? I'm just wondering. No, Israel never did this. Israel never took all of this land. And in fact, the closest that they ever came, when was the closest they ever came to taking all of this? Time of David and Solomon? Yes. Now, the western border of the Mediterranean, David never took that. There's the real interesting thing there. They never actually got to the Mediterranean until 144 BC. You can read about that in 1 Maccabees 14:5. That's a book that's not in the Bible, but it records historical information. There's an interesting statement that's... Now, some people will argue with this and take you to Joshua chapter 21 in verses 43 through 45. The Lord gave Israel all the land which He had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all that He had sworn to their fathers. And no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. So, well, wait a second. It just says that God gave them all the land. So what do you mean they didn't possess all of it? How would you answer that? Don?
Well, God gave it to them, but they didn't take advantage of it.
Wait, you're saying that just because God gives you something doesn't mean you automatically have it? What? I'm confused.
God offers everybody's salvation, but not everybody takes it.
And there you have it. God's promises do not fail, but man fails to receive the promises sometimes. God gave them the land, but then you keep reading, you read even the rest of Joshua, you read the beginning of Judges, you see what? Israel didn't actually possess the land. And in fact, the beginning of Judges goes to great length to describe how some of the tribes were living in locations among the Canaanites. In other words, they weren't even the dominant force in their area. And one tribe in particular, Dan was supposed to get an inheritance right about here, on this close to Judah, really, on the southern area. But what wound up happening? They were actually driven out of that territory. And as a result of that, they wound up attacking a city in the far north called Laish and killing all the inhabitants and renaming that Dan. And so Dan became the northern part of Israel, even though its inheritance was supposed to be allotted in the south. Now that's one of the great oddities of biblical history. Every time the Bible talks about something going on from Dan to Beersheba, Dan is in the northernmost part of the land, and Beersheba is in the southernmost part of the land. So it's basically the whole length of the land, geographically speaking. So God gave Israel the land, but Israel didn't take it. There's a contrast between God's power to give and the nation's ability to receive. And it's really proof of what Paul said in Ephesians 3, verse 20, that God is able to do greater things than man can ask or even think. It's analogous to, as Don already pointed out, it's analogous to salvation. Salvation is the free gift of God. There's no disputing that because it's all over the New Testament. God, we are saved by grace through faith. It is not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. But just because it's a free gift doesn't mean that all receive it. All right. We keep going in Numbers 34. We see something else. The Lord spoke to Moses in verse 16, saying, "These are the names of the men who shall apportion the land to you for inheritance: Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun. You shall take one leader of every tribe to apportion the land for inheritance. These are the names of the men of the tribe of Judah: Caleb the son of Jephunneh. Of the tribe of the sons of Simeon, Samuel the son of Ammihud. Of the tribe of Benjamin, Elidad the son of Shislon. Of the tribe of the sons of Dan, a leader, Buki the son of Jokli. Of the sons of Joseph, of the tribe of the sons of Manasseh, a leader, Haniel the son of Ephod. Of the tribe of the sons of Ephraim, a leader, Kemuel the son of Shiptan. Of the tribe of the sons of Zebulun, a leader, Elizaphan the son of Parnak. Of the tribe of the sons of Issachar, a leader, Paltiel the son of Azan. Of the leader of the tribe of the sons of Asher, a leader, Ahihud the son of Shalomi. Of the tribe of the sons of Naphtali, a leader, Pedahel the son of Ammihud. These are those whom the Lord commanded to apportion the inheritance to the sons of Israel in the land of Canaan. Now, so how's it going to be divvied up? We got 9.5 tribes on the other side of the Jordan now. How are we going to decide who gets what piece of land?
Later.
Okay, one leader from every tribe will be in charge of his individual tribe, right? Okay. And based on, and what tribe goes where? How do they decide that? What's that based on?
God's decision.
Well, yeah, but what's God basing his decision on?
Size of the tribe.
Okay, yes, the size of the tribe. And he actually said that back in 33:54 as well, that the bigger tribes get bigger land and the smaller tribes get smaller land. And he also bases it on lots, which was basically, whatever lots were, drawing straws or rolling dice or maybe using the Urim and the Thummim. We don't know exactly how they did that, but that's basically, it's a way of making it arbitrary and fair. The tribal leaders listed in 34 in verses 19 through 28 would be responsible for dividing it up more specifically. And the only name that's really familiar to us in that list is Caleb, because Caleb is one of the only people that survived from the previous generation besides Joshua. Now, so there's a general movement here. Actually, this list here is kind of arranged in a way that we're moving from south to north in terms of who gets their inheritance as well, although the inheritance hasn't been given yet. So that's how the land would be divided up. Any questions on chapter 34?
So it sounds like God's original plan was for the tribes to just take that.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's correct.
And that because they never really did occupy it, God's plan was really better. Because it sounds like to take over the land. And it seems like Reuben and
Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, yeah, well,
asked to be over on the other side. That, I don't know.
well, like that was circumventing their ability to take the land. And that's an interesting thought to bring up.
Not necessarily, but God's first plan is really the better. Yeah,
Well, yeah.
the better. That they could have taken it over, promised them. But don't know, sometimes our eyes are bigger than ours.
Sometimes. There is a statement in the law that God said, I will not drive them out in a single year because the land would overtake you with beasts and things like that. And as a result, and for the life of me, I can't remember the reference for that passage right off the top of my head. But when it's all said and done, these people failed to really live up to God's expectations. You're right. Don?
I would think it's not necessarily just a lack of people, although that's entirely possible. Those 2.5 tribes should have been offered there.
Right.
What the initial plan was, I think it's more a lack of faith.
I think that's the bigger part, yes.
Not really what God says. Take down all those idols, take down high places, get rid of all that stuff, and let really drive the people out. It's all yours. It's a clear, easy condition to understand. You had to put in one ear and out the other. They decided they wanted to do what they wanted to do.
Right. Well, and right here we have another problem is Israel's failure to do what God said. I mean, and maybe they were overtaken by a culture of religious tolerance. I don't know. I may be imposing a modern phenomenon on an ancient situation. But, I mean, the fact that they didn't kill off the Canaanites and destroy the idols right away, well, maybe the system has some value to it. Maybe they have something to bring to the table. Maybe they have something to offer or something like that. There's all these rationalizations that could go into that. But when it's all said and done, what happens? Well, they didn't trust what God said. That's the problem.
Well, think of them on their journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. Is that a real smooth journey for them?
No.
All kinds of trust in God all every inch of the way.
Well, no. Israel's character does not change much throughout their history.
And it's almost predictable. They do when they get to the Promised Land.
Right. As a people, they generally, how they act in the wilderness becomes the pattern for their behavior in the land itself. And it really becomes the pattern for everything else. There's a reason that these things were written for our instruction because, the same temptations could easily overtake us.
1 Corinthians chapter 10 tells us.
Right. When Paul says that no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to man, we rip that out of context a lot. What he's talking about in context is, Israel went through all these temptations and they fell. You're going to go through the same thing. Now, how are you going to respond to it? Because God gave Israel a way of escape, and He's giving you a way of escape too. But you could be like Israel very easily. In the context of 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13, that's what it's really talking about on that instance. All right. Just looking at all of this. Anything else on chapter 34? Chapter 35. Determined to finish. The Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho, saying, Command the sons of Israel that they give to the Levites from the inheritance of their possessions cities to live in. You shall give to the Levites pasture lands around the cities. The cities shall be theirs to live in, and their pasture land shall be for their cattle and for their herds and for all their beasts. The pasture lands of the cities which you shall give to the Levites shall extend from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits around. You shall also measure outside the city on the east 2,000 cubits on the south side, 2,000 cubits on the west side, 2,000 cubits, and on the north side 2,000 cubits, with the city in the center. This shall become theirs as pasture lands for the cities. The cities which you give to the Levites shall be the 6 cities of refuge, which you shall give for the manslayer to flee to. And in addition to them you shall give 42 cities. All the cities which you shall give to the Levites shall be 48 cities, together with their pasture lands. As for the cities which you shall give from the possession of the sons of Israel, you shall take more from the larger, and you shall take less from the smaller. Each shall give some of his cities to the Levites in proportion to his possession, which he inherits. All right, how many cities do the Levites get? 48 total. Right. And basically, it's been the pattern for everything else in the book. The rules for the Levites follow the rules for everybody else. The Levites don't get land because the Lord is their inheritance. Instead, they get cities. And 6 of these cities would be cities of refuge. Another random question. Were the Levites the only people who lived in these cities? No, they weren't. And we'll see in a second that the Levites frequently lived among the people in these cities, but the pasture lands around the cities were theirs to use as well. Included in those 48 cities were 6 cities of refuge, and they're not specified what they are here. But you've already got 1, 2, 3 on one side of the Jordan, which will be Golan, Ramoth Gilead, and Bezer. And on the other side, we have Kedesh, Shechem, and Hebron. And those were the 3 cities of refuge. And you see how they're kind of, they tried to space them out a little bit to keep them all throughout the land. Now, let's read about the purpose of a city of refuge. Well, one of those cities of refuge I mentioned, Hebron, is actually conquered by Caleb in Joshua chapter 13. So we see even on that occasion that the Judahites actually had control of that city as well. Picking up in verse 9, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall select for yourselves cities to be your cities of refuge, that the manslayer who has killed any person unintentionally may flee there. The city shall be to you as refuge from the avenger, so that the manslayer will not die until he stands before the congregation for trial. The cities which you are to give shall be your 6 cities of refuge. You shall give 3 cities across the Jordan, 3 cities in the land of Canaan. They are to be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the sons of Israel, and for the alien and for the sojourner among them, that anyone who kills a person unintentionally may flee there. But if he struck him down with an iron object so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. If he struck him down with a stone in the hand, by which he will die, as a result he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. If he struck him with a wooden object in the hand, by which he might die, as a result he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. The blood avenger himself shall put the murderer to death. He shall put him to death when he meets him. If he pushed him of hatred, or threw something at him, lying in wait, and as a result he died, or if he struck him down with his hand in enmity, and as a result he died, the one who struck him shall surely be put to death. He is a murderer. The blood avenger shall put the murderer to death when he meets him. But if he pushed him suddenly without enmity, or threw something at him without lying in wait, or with any deadly object of stone, and without seeing it, dropped it on him so that he died, while he was not his enemy, nor seeking his injury, the congregation shall judge between the slayer and the blood avenger according to these ordinances. The congregation shall deliver the manslayer from the hand of the blood avenger, and the congregation shall restore him to his city of refuge to which he fled. He shall live in it until the death of the high priest, who was anointed with the holy oil. But if the manslayer at any time goes beyond the border of the city of refuge, to which he may flee, and the blood avenger finds him outside the border of his city of refuge, the blood avenger kills the manslayer, he will not be guilty of blood, because he should have remained in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer shall return to the land of his possession. These things shall be for a statutory ordinance to you throughout your generations in all your dwellings. And if anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death at the evidence of witnesses. But no person shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. Moreover, you shall not take ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall surely be put to death. You shall not take ransom for him who has fled to his city of refuge, that he may return to live in the land before the death of the priest. So you shall not pollute the land in which you are, for blood pollutes the land, and no expiation can be made for the land for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, am dwelling in the midst of the sons of Israel. Now, there's a lot of information in there, and in the interest of time, I'm going to go through some of the answers to this fairly quickly. The cities of refuge were places to flee in the case of an accidental manslaughter, and a place where manslayers could flee if they accidentally killed someone. Now, it's important, and the reason for all of that is really given in verse 33 and 34. Innocent blood that is shed defiles the ground. Since the beginning it has been that way. Whenever Abel was killed by Cain, God told Cain that your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. In Genesis chapter 9, in verses 6 and 7, it says that whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood must be shed. Why? Well, because the blood defiles the ground. It cries out for vengeance. Now, throughout this section, the avenger of blood, or really it's the word for redeemer, the redeemer of blood, is mentioned throughout this section. And this law applies to Israelites and foreigners alike. There's no distinction between the two of them. We mentioned the 6 cities of refuge. Another thing that could serve as a refuge was the horns of the altar. We see that invoked in 1 Kings chapter 1 and again in 1 Kings chapter 2. What's the main difference between a murderer and a manslayer in this passage? Whether or not you intended to kill him. Right. Exactly. Or more, and if you kill somebody in a fit of rage, it's taken as you intended to kill them. If you push him in anger or you hit him with something in anger, you can't play the card, oh, but I didn't mean to do it afterwards. That doesn't work. You killed him in anger, you intended to do it. But if it's like, oh, well, I was doing construction on my house and I accidentally dropped a rock and there was a guy underneath me I didn't see and he died, well, that's accidental. And so in that instance, you flee to the city of refuge. And there is no atonement for it, save the blood of the person who did the killing. The main distinction is whether that death was accidental or intentional. Now, a manslayer could leave a city of refuge when? The death of the high priest. What happens if he leaves before that?
If the person avenges his blood, he's not liable for it.
Right. And the death of a high priest, this is really one of the imperfections in the law, if you think about it, because it signals that the high priests are continually dying. They're prevented by death from continuing. The Hebrew author talks about that in Hebrews chapter 7, 8, and 9. And so leaving before the death of the high priest meant your life was forfeit. But, the constant death of the high priest reminds them that you're all mere men. Now, this, of course, leads me to another consideration, which is that if this is an imperfection in the law, well, what's the equivalent of our city of refuge today?
See, I was seeing it more as an analogy to our high priest that we have.
Who is...
And the refuge that we have through the death of our high priest.
Right. So when can we leave that refuge?
We don't.
Why not?
Because he's in heaven above.
Because our high priest will never die. That's the point there. When you think about it, if we are in a city of refuge now, typologically speaking, well, we can't leave until the high priest dies. But alas, the high priest will never die because he is Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, never to die again. And so we cannot leave that city, else our blood is on our own head at that point. Something to think about. Now, the laws for murder are addressed in detail here as well, and that's connected to all of that. You need 2 or 3 witnesses for conviction. You can't do it on just one witness because it's really nothing more. It's like nothing more than hearsay at that point. There is no ransom for murderers. You can't buy your way out of it. When you stole something, you could pay off your debt. But when you kill somebody, there's no way to buy your way out of that. You can't put a price on human life. You can't really offer an animal sacrifice to atone for it either. The only thing you can do is, and there's no plea bargaining either. If you plead guilty, that doesn't get you out of the penalty. The death penalty for murderers is a must. The only exception is if it's an accidental killing, in which case he goes to the city of refuge, and there's no way out of that either. You can't pay a sacrifice to get out of the city of refuge. Not until the death of the high priest. Because innocent blood defiles the land, because the land must not be defiled, because a holy God cannot dwell among a defiled people. In verse 34, you shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, am dwelling in the midst of the sons of Israel. Any comments or questions? Really quick.
Simpler way of clearing out the court system.
It would be a much simpler way of clearing it. There's a lot of stuff in the Old Testament law that really we should probably, that really it would be simpler if the civil government did that instead, but alas, here we are, we're in the system we're in, and the system we're in now is just as beset with imperfections and difficulties. Even more so, really, because it didn't come from a divine author. Chapter 36. Very, very quickly. The heads of the fathers' households of the family of the sons of Gilead, the sons of Machir, the sons of Manasseh, of the families of the sons of Joseph, came near and spoke before Moses and before the leaders, the heads of the fathers' households of the sons of Israel. And they said, "The Lord commanded my Lord to give the land by lot to the sons of Israel as an inheritance. My Lord was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of Zelophehad, our brother, to his daughters. But if they marry one of the sons of the other tribes of the sons of Israel, their inheritance will be withdrawn from the inheritance of our fathers and will be added to the inheritance of the tribe to which they belong. Thus it will be withdrawn from our allotted inheritance. And when the Jubilee of the sons of Israel comes, their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe to which they belong. So their inheritance will be withdrawn from the inheritance of the tribe of the fathers." Moses commanded the sons of Israel according to the word of the Lord, saying, "The tribe of the sons of Joseph are right in their statements. This is what the Lord has commanded concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, let them marry whom they wish, only they must marry within the family of the tribe of their father. Thus no inheritance of the sons of Israel shall be transferred from tribe to tribe, for the sons of Israel shall each hold to the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. Every daughter who comes into possession of an inheritance of any tribe of the sons of Israel shall be wife to one of the family of the tribe of her father, so that the sons of Israel each may possess the inheritance of his fathers. Thus no inheritance shall be transferred from one tribe to another tribe, for the tribes of the sons of Israel shall each hold to his own inheritance. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses, so the daughters of Zelophehad did. Mahlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, the daughters of Zelophehad, married their uncle's sons. They married those from the families of the sons of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, and their inheritance remained within the tribe of the family of their father. These are the commandments and ordinances which the Lord commanded to the sons of Israel through Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho. All right, so the basic crisis here, in a nutshell, goes back, it's a throwback to chapter 27. In chapter 27, they made a law that said if a man dies without sons, his daughters inherit his land. But the problem is that if those daughters marry outside of the tribe, that land now becomes the property of a different tribe, because marriage basically changes what tribe you're a part of. And so the tribe of Manasseh is complaining on this occasion, saying, well, we're going to lose our land if they marry outside the family. And so basically the rule that is made in verses 6 and in verse 8 is that if you are a woman who has inherited land because of the law from chapter 27, you must marry within your tribe. Otherwise, that tribe loses land, the Jubilee law won't get it back because marriage trumps the Jubilee law, and each tribe must hold to the inheritance of the tribe of their fathers. And in fact, the real point of this is in verse 9, connected to all of this about the promise of, it's really connected to the promise of God for the land. The land cannot be taken away from them who possess it. And in verse 9 it says, no inheritance shall be transferred from one tribe to another tribe. Nobody can take your inheritance away from you. The tribes of the sons of Israel shall each hold to his own inheritance. So as we conclude, I realize this kind of seems like a little bit of a mundane way to end the book of Numbers, but in reality it's actually designed to show the permanence of the land promise, ending on a note of hope and segueing into how the people are going to prepare for life in the promised land without Moses, which will be the subject of Deuteronomy. And that's all for the book of Numbers. Next week we're going to take a break from the law, actually. We're going to have some of the other men teach the Sunday morning class, and we're going to start with Keith next Sunday. Keith, have you decided what you're going to teach on yet, or? Okay, well, all right, well, I'm looking forward to finding out. So Keith will be taking over class on Sunday morning, and we'll probably go for about a month, and then Mark, and then Dennis. I'm assuming that's the order that they want to go in, but I'll have to talk to them ahead of time and work that out. So that'll be all for now.